Hey, I'm Maggie,
I'm Mike,
and this is Friends on Fire.
and we're on a mission to get friends to talk about money. So we have another great interview for you guys today.
We have Jess and Corey here from a popular blog called the Fioneers, and I'm a big fan. I follow them on Instagram. I read a lot of their content, and I've just really enjoyed it, and I love their name, which we'll get into more in a little while. But we just really wanted to welcome them and thank you for coming on the show, Jess and Corey. So welcome to Friends on Fire.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
So maybe we could just kind of have you two start by telling us a little bit about yourself, just so our listeners get an understanding of, who you are.
Sure. So we are a married couple, no children, and we're in our early to mid 30s. We live in Boston, so a pretty high cost of living area. I think sometimes it's a sort of misunderstanding that people think that you can't pursue FI in a high cost of living area. And we definitely try to communicate that it is possible. We both also work in nonprofit organizations. I actually started working part-time in a nonprofit organization about a year and a half ago.
One of the things that we really like to ask people about, and you can each kind of answer this individually if you'd like, but as we like to hear kind of as much as you want to share or willing to share, tell us a little bit about kind of how you were raised from a financial perspective and what that instilled in you about money or taught you about money.
So for me, as a kid, I was always hustling. So whether it was mowing lawns, babysitting, or washing cars, I was always busy and always earning money. But as a kid, it wasn't about earning money itself. It was always about what can I buy or using money as a tool for something that I wanted. So of course, it started with regular Nintendo games. So I'd wash a car for $5 or $10 and be able to buy a used game. And then later, my hobbies changed, interests changed. It was Nerf guns and electronics. But it really built in a fundamental belief and understanding about money that it's a tool. It's not positive or negative, but it's something that can be used to get what you want, whether it's an experience or an item. And I think that was really helpful for me as an adult, because especially as we jumped into financial independence, because often the narrative becomes so focused on the money goal and not so much about the lifestyle or what it's used for. And so it helped me just kind of ingrained in me that money is a tool and not the end goal.
And what about you, Jess?
For me, my sort of money story is a little bit different. I grew up in a household that always seemed, just to be good with money. There wasn't ever really money stress, but I knew like my family was pretty frugal. Like my mom was clipping coupons and shopping the sales. And I knew that my parents never took on any debt. I never really did the hustling though, so I didn't learn that valuable money as a tool lesson. Like it was like we were saving money just to save it. It felt like in some ways. But one thing that was really formative for me was when I was about to go to college or about to make decisions about college, my dad sat me down and it was basically the expectation that like I would not take on debt to go to school. He was like, you have two options. You can go to the school where it's going to like cover all of your expenses through scholarships. He's like, or you can go to the one where it doesn't. And then you can work every summer, not an internship, legit job to make money so you can pay for school. Right. And those were my two options at the age of, 18 as I was making decisions. And so that instilled in me this idea that like, I'm going to avoid debt at absolutely all cost, which I really appreciate. I think that served me well. I also think that it contributed in some ways to a scarcity mindset of not seeing money as a tool, but seeing money as something that shouldn't be spent and just should be like constantly saved or given away. And so that's been a real, I think, transformation for me as I've learned about financial independence of like, how do we actually use money in a way that will benefit our lives and to not feel guilty about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love what your dad said. Which option did you choose, by the way?
I chose the option where I got scholarships.
The first option, right?
Yeah.
I like that he didn't include the third option, which is, you can incur, $50,000 to $100,000 in debt.
Right.
I like that was not even on the table. So
it wasn't. It was not even a possibility, like in my mind. Like I didn't even think that was.
That is a gift he gave you at a young age. That, I like it.
So fast forward to today. Why FIRE? We talk about your quote unquote why. So what's your why?
I would say our why for financial independence has evolved a bit over time. But I would say for us, it's less about the retiring early part of financial independence. And it's more about building financial freedom that we can utilize along the way. So we're not actually in a huge hurry to reach FIRE, right? We're focused on like the journey, right? And so that's really the theme of, in our philosophy, is that we want the journey to financial independence to be as remarkable as the destination. And so we're figuring out how we can use this financial freedom we gain along the way to live a life that is aligned with sort of our values and our priorities, and with this vision that we have for our ideal life. And it did transition over time.
When I think about why Phi, I'm thinking about the motivation for Phi, and I think about it in two ways. One is kind of a push, and another is a pull. So both like, what is it pushing you away from? And then also what's pulling you towards it. And so when we started and we officially said, we're going to start on this financial independence, certainly we had a jump start and we were already kind of savers from the very beginning. But we did make an intentional shift to pursue financial independence. And one of the biggest motivations for us and for Jess especially was that she was working in a toxic job environment, and it was pushing her away from that. So she was saying, I don't want to continue in this. I want to move away from this. So it was more of a push. But really over time, it's transitioned and it's changed to be really a pull. So what is it that we're pursuing, and what is it that's luring us towards something that's a better life with more flexibility and freedom?
I love the push versus pull, and just in general, your unique approach to Phi. And I know it's a lot of what you kind of focus on and talk about in your blog, The Fioneers, which we'll get into more. But I love that approach because I do think it just focuses on enjoying the journey, like you say. It's just not getting too caught up in some of the kind of specifics and tactics along the way. So how did you guys meet and or figure out that you were, like, did you meet each other and realize you both had the same passion and alignment in terms of view on life? Did one of you start this and bring the other along? Like, I'm curious to kind of hear this Fioneers love story a bit.
That's funny. I can't wait to hear Jess's response, because I'm sure
I should have asked you that we should ask that question separately to each of you where the other can't hear, and then we'll compare it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because we were on two different journeys for a long time. And so I actually was in the kind of personal finance blogging community for many years. And so I was reading and digesting this information for a long time, probably 5 years before Jess. And, interestingly enough, initially when I heard about financial independence, I kind of excluded myself from someone who was even eligible for it. And part of that was because I was working in a nonprofit setting. And usually the narrative that I was reading or hearing was you work a high income job, you save up a lot of money, you quote unquote retire, and then you give back, right? And so I was kind of jumping ahead. I was already giving back with my day-to-day job. And so the narrative didn't align with how I thought of myself. And so for a long time, I was just reading it out of intellectual curiosity and interest in personal finance. But I think slowly over time, especially as I look back at it, those fundamental ideas were taking hold. And so one thing that really took hold was this idea of incremental freedom, that if we save just a little bit more, we could achieve freedom and flexibility. Although at the time I was probably thinking of it as an earlier retirement where, we save now, more now, and we can shorten our working career. And that, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I'm sure has changed too. And so for a long time, Jess and I would have these conversations, and I would say, let's just save 5% more. And there was some reluctance because she wasn't in the same spot as I was and didn't understand that if you increased your savings, it gives you more flexibility in the future. And Jess, I don't know if you want to share more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't really understand it, nor did I really try early on. I think I still saw this idea of, we were actually starting to make money for the first time, and more and above our actual expenses. And then all of a sudden, Corey wanted to just save all of it. And I was like, no, I want to travel. I want to go out to eat sometimes. I want to hang out with friends. I want to do all of these things. But I think I didn't necessarily have a picture of our finances. So I didn't really know how much we were saving. I couldn't tell you oh, this is how much we make, how much we save, how much discretionary income we had. I just sort of saw it in blanket statements of being we can do this or we can't do this. It's sort of all or nothing. And so then I felt like saving more would feel like deprivation because I didn't really understand what we were saving it for. And so, yeah, so this was a few years. So this was a good 8 years of our marriage, I think, that Corey was sort of taking the lead fully on the finances, and I was just happy to let him do that. And I was, sort of avoiding talking about money. I think I had, based on what I shared about my childhood experiences, I had this level of guilt about having money. Based on some experience that I had traveling internationally and volunteering internationally and volunteering in the United States, that I felt like it was, money is evil, and, if you have money, you should be giving it all away kind of thing. And so I just didn't want to think about it. And I think that perspective has shifted a lot over time. I think the way that Corey actually convinced me and sort of got me on board was, one, he actually gave me the book, Your Money or Your Life, to read. So I know that's a pretty foundational Phi book. And that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. I think, one, it opened my eyes to the fact that there were people who were deciding the way that they wanted to live their life. That wasn't just work 40 hours a week for 40 years. People were making intentional decisions to live life differently. And I think hadn't realized that was possible for me. And then I think the second thing was that I started to actually understand the mechanics. I didn't really understand the mechanics of retirement. And the crossover point and when your passive income can cover your full expenses, that had never made the connection in my brain before. And so when I started to understand, oh, this is how it works, it isn't just you save as much as you can and then maybe you can retire someday. It started to seem real, and that we weren't just dealing with monopoly money. And so part of that, so that was really the first step. I wasn't totally on board still at that point. I was I'm intrigued, I'm interested, early retirement seems like a good idea. But it still felt like deprivation to me. It still seemed like I would need to stay in this really toxic job where I make a higher income for another 10 years to be able to reach Phi, because one, we had already been managing our finances well. And so when I read the book for the first time, I turned to Corey and I was like, is this a real thing? Can we actually do this? And he was like, oh yeah, our timeline's 10 years. And I was like, wait, what? But I still wasn't ready to commit at that moment. We had to really discuss like what is it that we wanted to be different about our journey and about the focus on like happiness now before I was really ready to like make the leap.
I love you two sharing that because I think it's so important for other people to hear that many couples aren't just magically aligned at the beginning, right? It often is one person. And have you guys seen Playing with Fire or read the book?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a similar story, right? Where it started with the husband and like she was not really down for it at first and felt like it was like, I work hard, I, should enjoy these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's just sort of everybody's like clicking point or their why kind of evolves and can come at a different time on their journey. But I think it's important for people to hear because I think sometimes when people are hearing about couples or individual people that are on this journey, they think that it just like they were born that way, right? Or they, had always wanted that or had always known that. So I think it's helpful for people to kind of hear that journey. And I loved hearing about yours. So how did the Fioneers start?
In the summer of 2018, we went like we a lot of times we will get our like best insights when we're like off the grid, like, so we were on a vacation up in Maine in a cabin that had no like internet, or our phones wouldn't even like connect to the network. And we were like hashing this out. Like we were actually like sitting on the porch of this cabin, like hashing out what we would want to be different about our Phi journey, and about how we would want it to focus a lot more on happiness along the way. And we were thinking about it and we started to realize like we aren't reading any voices in the current fire community that have that sort of message, right? And so even 2 years ago in the fire community, it felt like the message was still, and sometimes today it still feels like it's make as much money as you possibly can as quickly as possible, save as much as you can so you can retire as early as you possibly can, right? And so we felt like we had a unique message to share, and we were hearing, we were hearing people starting to say like, "Hey, maybe you should slow down." I was actually miserable on my journey to early retirement, and so that's, I think, where the idea was born. I think we decided that we felt like we had a message that we felt like was missing in the community.
And what's interesting for the Fioneers is that we were choosing to start the website at the same time that we were officially pursuing financial independence. And we did that because we said if we want to start on this journey, we should chronicle it and we should track our progress and we should share our success and failures with everyone. So it is kind of this nice overlap. Certainly not starting from zero. Certainly years of my forcing Jess to save a little bit more, but yeah, it was an exciting kind of convergence of both starting our pursuit of financial independence and also the blog at the same time.
And I think the reason why it felt like a natural step to do that, to like chronicle it through a blog, is that Corey had run a personal finance blog for many years before this. And so we already knew the like ins and outs of it. And so it was like, great, we're starting this new thing, we might as well. It didn't feel like such a high, I think, barrier to entry, which is what it might feel like for many people when they're first starting out.
So how'd you come up with the name The Fioneers?
I picture now that it's in that main cabin where there was no electricity. Yeah?
That's exactly it, actually.
There was electricity in the cabin.
Oh, sorry. No, I meant Wi-Fi. Which to some people, Wi-Fi might basically be the same thing as electricity, but yeah, sorry.
It is
no
very
Wi-Fi.
Similar, yep. Yeah, and so obviously the environment influenced our theme, but I think we came up with the message first, and so we were trying to figure out like how can our voice be different, and obviously the emphasis on the journey was a big part of that. And so we were brainstorming and trying to come up with the creative names. And so we just started talking through a couple of lines of thought of like, we're adventurers, we like to explore new things. And then somewhere the word pioneers came up, and just thinking through, are we pioneers? Pioneers says this sentiment that you're the first to do something, but it's not just that you're the first, it's you're trying something new. And even though there are many other voices in the Phi community, it did feel like we had something to add. And of course, everyone loves a little play on words and combining Phi with others. And so I liked how pioneers the P in the pioneers could easily be replaced with the F. So we said it kind of stuck. Once we did get service, we were able to Google if the domain was available. At first it was, it still is thefioneers.com, and thankfully it was available.
Yeah, it's good you guys, you didn't spend too much time settled on that name only to find out it was taken.
Oh, I know.
It was funny. We like specifically drove and made sure that we got to a place where we had service so we could like check it on our phones.
That's so funny.
That's great.
We could buy it, and then we like bought the domain, and I think we like got the Twitter handle that same day down like on our phones somewhere.
Nice.
Like trying to get internet.
Yeah, it seemed like such a great idea that someone else was going to come up with it, and like we didn't want that regret of like waiting a
The
couple
hours
of
in
days.
between. Yeah. It really is. It's a super clever name. I love it personally.
You talked a little bit about your unique approach to this, and on your blog, you spent a lot of time talking about lifestyle design and a specific approach to fire. Can you take us through that?
Our approach to Phi is the journey should be as remarkable as the destination. And when I was first learning about Phi, I was reading other blogs, as I said, and one that stood out to me was the Mad Scientist. After he reached Phi, I think it was an article or a podcast that he shared. Looking back, someone asked him, like, what would you change? And he said, if anything, I would go slower, that he pursued Phi too quickly. And that kind of stuck in my mind. And I think there were a few other voices, including Carl from 1500 Days, and I think it was JD Roth as well, who on the Afford Anything podcast had shared about his journey. And they all were sharing that they pushed themselves so hard that they were miserable, and kind of lost sight of the end goal. And as I said earlier, the end goal is often confused with this number, this financial number, whether it's net worth or how much earnings you need from your investments.
I was just going to joke as you were saying that, which is a great point. I was thinking about how I'm sitting here in a tank top in my house where I've not yet turned on the air conditioning while it's 80 degrees in Atlanta. As you're saying, they talked about how they were, making themselves miserable on the, and I was like, maybe I should appease my husband and turn on the air conditioning today. I sometimes like the stoic nature of a little bit of suffering. I think is kind of enjoyable actually, but it's a great point.
Yeah. So they all remarked about how they were just making themselves miserable in pursuit of this. And so they pushed themselves too fast, too hard. And from the very beginning, we said that we didn't want that to be us. So they often remarked that they were pushing themselves too hard and too fast. And we said that we didn't want that to be us. And so as we were thinking about our journey, we didn't want to focus just on where we were going, but how we were going to get there and what our life looked like, and making that a reality today. And so our journey is a little bit slower. We coined the term SlowFI to kind of represent that. So we're still pursuing Phi, but we're going about a little bit more slowly. And for us, it's kind of a bold statement because the conversations that we had heard was it's kind of all or nothing. Either you're pursuing financial independence and going all in and life hacking your way to financial freedom, or you're not, right? And it was either you're in this group or you're not. And for us, it was kind of this happy balance of we are going to pursue this, but we're going to keep the end in mind, and it's not just a financial number.
And to add to that, I would say our perspective has evolved over time. So it sounds, we did start our journey thinking we want to make sure that we focus on the process and that we're not miserable along the process. But I think we didn't fully grasp lifestyle design right from the very beginning. At first, I think we still thought that early retirement would be the goal, but that we would make sure to take it slower and we wouldn't be miserable and push too hard along the way. And then as we went along, this like lifestyle design approach has evolved. So for example, a few weeks after that famed trip to Maine in 2018, work got really, really hard for me. It was already fairly toxic, but it sort of came to a head. And I started to have pretty severe anxiety and panic attacks. And so this actually forced me to take about 6 months off of work, and ultimately to quit the stressful job that I was in. And so this, I think, process, sometimes, a crisis makes you like rethink a lot of things in your life. And so this did for us. And I think during this time, we figured out a lot of like what financial freedom actually means, like for our lives today, right? And so as I was, looking at even the logistics of should I go, apply for the short-term disability plan or should I just quit, and actually looking at the finances of that, right? And what it meant for today when I looked at it was like, oh, wow, we have a 9-month emergency fund. And then I was like, oh, wait, but we already save 50% of our income. So even if I did completely quit, we wouldn't even have to tap into the emergency fund. And so it was kind of that process of figuring out, like, this is what money actually means for us in this moment. I think that really kicked off that process and really allowed me to say, well, I could go back to work part-time. I could go back to work 3 days a week, focus, continue to heal, focus on my, mental and physical health. And then looking at the numbers and realizing like that with our current spending, that would increase our timeline by only 2 to 3 years, that it seemed like almost like a no-brainer. It was like 6 months ago, I would not have even like thought that could be a possible option. And then looking at the numbers, realizing like, wow, we would still be able to retire early in our mid 40s if we made that unconventional decision to do that now. And so that was really the process that got us into like, okay, people can make pretty big and significant shifts along their path to Phi. It doesn't actually need to like totally derail people.
Yeah. It's not an all or nothing thing.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think it was that experience that really, I think, solidified it for us that the sort of SlowFi message is about like, how can you grab hold of the incremental financial freedom that you gain along the path? And for us, right, so far, that's looked like me deciding to work part-time, us deciding to, continue to work in nonprofit organizations, and for me to start building up a business on the side. For other people, right, that could look different. It could be them finding a job that they enjoy more, even if it pays a little bit less. Or it could be, working seasonally. It could be taking a sabbatical or a mini retirement, or someone becoming a freelancer, right? Or building their own business, or even spending more, right? It could mean that someone wants to spend more money on specific hobbies that they love, right? And so I think SlowFi is like, it's not a particular like number. It's more of a mindset of saying, I'm going to use my financial freedom to help me build a life that I love right now.
I love the way you talk about SlowFi and just everything that it stands for and means. And I think, one thing that I heard you say a couple of times is, you did the math on like taking that part-time move and knowing, that's going to add 2 to 3 years onto our journey. And I'm okay with that trade-off. And we talk a lot about just knowing your numbers, right? Just understanding your net worth, doing the math to kind of, project how you will handle things over the future while you're working, once you're retired, et cetera. And I think just having a handle on that and knowing enough to be able to make an informed trade-off is such a good position to be in, right? And kind of half the battle here of just, again, knowing enough about where you stand financially to be able to make those sorts of decisions and trade-offs. So I love the SlowFi concept. I've noticed you guys recently talking about this thing, Coast Phi. I'd love for you to kind of tell us what Coast Phi is.
So I define Coast Phi as when you have enough already saved for retirement that if you leave it untouched, it will continue to grow so that you can retire comfortably at a traditional retirement age, right? So there's a lot of assumptions that go into this, right? Including like the expected market returns, inflation, your chosen withdrawal rate, how many years you have, right, to see that growth in the market. So how old are you now? How old are you hoping to be able to fully retire? And your expenses, right? So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. We do have a tool on our website that we can share with your audience to be able to like calculate this number for themselves. But I think the idea behind Coast Phi is that once you're to this place where you no longer need, quote unquote, to put more money into your retirement accounts to be able to retire comfortably, it means that you could actually scale back your work to only cover your actual cost of living, right? And so you could, you could make a lot of those lifestyle decisions that we were talking about in terms of SlowFi to, work less and focus on things that you value outside of work more. So I love the idea of Coast Phi. We are not exactly doing Coast Phi right now, right? And so we have reached that milestone. So if we wanted to, we could scale back to cover only our cost of living. In reality, that isn't what we're doing. Corey's continuing to work full time because he's working in a job that he really enjoys and finds a lot of meaning in. And I'm working part-time, which, it was that understanding Coast Phi really made me feel a lot more comfortable with that decision to continue working part-time. I had a choice to increase my hours last summer, and I was like, no, I don't actually need to do that. And so decided not to. And then, I think our ultimate goal is we get to a place where we're running a location independent business where either we're Coast Phi because we're able to cover all of our cost of living through our location independent business, or we're waiting a little bit longer and doing that as semi-retired people, right? And so we're covering some of our cost of living through our own business and then some of our cost of living through our.
So one of the things I've really enjoyed about your story, both in how you two have evolved and then discussed and worked on this together, as well as the lifestyle design and the different types of FIs, is that it's very, I think, relatable and approachable for people. And so the benefit of discussing these things and learning about these things, it's why I think you guys do the blog. It's why we do the podcast. If we can introduce people to the idea that it's not all or nothing, there are different ways that you can improve your finances to just make your life better. And you don't have to do it our way. You just have to find something that works. And there's just like an infinite number of ways of doing it. And so the way you guys have been describing this, I think, is just very relatable and approachable.
Yeah, I totally agree. What are the top pieces of advice that you would give to someone who is really kind of like newer to this, right? If you were to just kind of give some advice and some counsel, like what are the big things you would advise people to focus on who are intrigued by and interested by the concept of FIRE?
Yeah, I guess I can start. One thing that I think about is how far I've come and how much my perspective has changed. And so one thing I would say to that is I would encourage people not to think of FIRE as a two-stage journey, as this accumulation stage and then early retirement stage. I think many people will get disappointed if they approach it this way, that they will truly, when they get to early retirement, if they do follow this two-stage path, they will find themselves having to adjust to a vastly different lifestyle And that's something that takes time. I know for us, as we've made lifestyle changes, they've been incremental and have been slow, and like step by step instead of going from one stark contrast to another. And I think with that, you can design your life along the way. And so it's not waiting until this distant future to live the life that you want, but it's making that incremental change to really grab a hold of what you want your life to be.
One thing that I would also add as well is to think about the effects of burnout in your life, right? Because I think a lot of people are pushed toward fire because they're burned out from a job, and they're when you ask them like, what would you do if you didn't need to work for money, right? And this was the case for me. I was like, I just want to sleep for like a year, and I think like people can't fathom wanting to do activities that would generate them income when they're burned out, right? That's exactly how I was. And now that I'm no longer experiencing burnout, like I feel like I'm completely recovered from that. There are so many ideas that I have and so many things that I want to do that will generate me income, right? And I think we see this in people who have retired early. Some of them, many of them, I would pose. After a couple of years, they're like, okay, I'm ready to like do something. I'm ready to, some people actually go back to a 9-to-5 job or a part-time job, but they do it in, sort of under their terms. They might start their own business. They might write a book. It's like everyone who's pursuing Phi has all of these like ideas, and are like really smart people. Like after a couple of years, you're going to want to do something. And so I just think for me, realizing that and realizing like now that I no longer feel burned out, that there's like so many like income generating ideas that I have that are truly fun for me, that it would be such a shame for me to like live 10 more years of my life in a toxic job just so I could retire early and then decide I want to make money doing things. Right? It would be a big regret, I think, to sort of put myself through that kind of life for longer when it's not necessary.
So what are some of those things that you are most excited about right now?
Yeah. So for me, there's a few things, right? So one is I obviously love writing on the blog. And so we're continuing to write and grow the blog and grow our audience and continue to get the message about SlowFI out there. The other thing is I actually recently launched a coaching business. And so I'm currently running some group coaching specifically focused on helping people who are pursuing Phi design lives that they love. So taking a lot of these same concepts, but applying them in a small group or one-on-one coaching setting. And I am loving it. It is really exciting. And this is the kind of work that I would brainstorm and I would think like, I would do this for free. I think it's better to charge because I think people are more committed when you do. Right. But
you deserve to, you've created a product, right? So,
but I do think like part of my guideposts have been, what are the things I would do anyways once I reached Phi? Can they generate me income? And if so, then I'm so much closer to the life that I want to be living. And I can do that today rather than waiting until this, distant future when I, reach my Phi number.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think of this podcast in that category of what are the things I would do anyways. Like we genuinely enjoy having these discussions and sharing them with others and the conversations that come as a part of doing it. So it's a great example. We will share links to the show notes to the course that you were just talking about, Jess, or the group coaching. I want to just kind of wrap up on a question of, are there any things that you two would have done differently, over the past decade on this, or even the past few years since you've been on this journey, that you just now have different perspective on?
I think for me, and I'll start and Jess can jump in. For me, it's probably slightly different than Jess. So one thing, and I recently wrote about this, just kind of reflecting on this change as well. Like I would have given myself more freedom to pursue hobbies and interests, even if they cost money. And so by my very nature, I want to save money and reach our financial goals and continue to buy more freedom for the future. But our SlowFi approach has helped me better understand that I need to find passions and things that I really enjoy doing. And so I recently got into disc golf when I'd never played disc golf before. And funny enough, like disc golf is one of the cheapest hobbies you can find. You can
Is that
buy,
how you
like,
found it? You were like Googling like inexpensive hobbies.
I wish that would be a great story. No, a few friends of mine introduced me to the hobby, and I was horrible the first time we went out, and decided to give it a second try. And the second time was a little bit better, and just really enjoyed getting out. I like being outdoors, and it was a good hobby to spend time with friends, and it's not too intense of a hobby or a sport either. So you don't have to take it too seriously, and have really enjoyed it. And so this past fall, I bought a practice basket, which is like $150. You can buy it on Amazon, and it's in our basement. And so every once in a while when I'm doing laundry, I can just practice putting. So there's a motion of putting when you're really close to the basket. And so I'm slowly getting better. And old Corey would not have invested $150 into some sport accessory. So I think that would be something that I would have done differently, is really embraced hobbies and activities, even if they cost a little bit of money.
Yeah, I like it. It's a great piece of advice. Jess, anything you want to add?
Yeah, this was a hard question for me. So I think that the thing that I would have done differently is that I would have gotten involved in finances, like gotten involved in our finances earlier. I think I didn't want to be involved previously. And, I think that was probably, a challenge coming from the money mindset that I had built. But because of that, I didn't understand our finances. I didn't understand what money really could do for us. I didn't understand the level of financial freedom that we had already. And so then because of that, I made some decisions that impacted me really negatively, right? So I stayed in a job for years longer than I needed to. That was pretty toxic, that ruined my mental health for a good period of time. And I sort of can attribute that back to the fact that I didn't really understand finances, and I didn't really understand how financial freedom could impact that, which is a big part of why I'm sharing this message so much, because I don't want other people to need to get to the same place that I did before actually looking at my finances and before figuring out what the possibilities were, because it's not necessary, right, to get to that sort of critical place.
Well, it sounds like you guys are doing great. The blog is amazing, and I really like your approach. And as I mentioned, I think it's a very relatable and approachable method for pursuing financial independence, and really appreciate you coming on our show today.
Thanks for having us.
I agree with Mike. I really like your approach. And I think it's one of the few blogs recently that has made me kind of change and challenge some of my thinking and some of my decisions. And I'll compliment you two with saying that is hard for people to do to me, right? Because I'm fairly strong and confident in how I think about things and what I think about the world. And even just the kind of Phi journey I've been on and why I've been on it, and the way you guys write about things, and really your, I know you say it a lot, but, and we'll quote you on this, but the journey should be as remarkable as the destination. That's a really, simple but meaningful phrase that I think really can be very inspiring and kind of challenging to people that may be on this journey. So we really appreciate what you guys are doing, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or comments, you can always give us a call or text us at 404-981-3370. Love to get a question, comment, or tip, and we will play it on the air.
Awesome. You can also follow us on Instagram or Facebook, and you can find those links on our website at www.friendsonfire.org.
Please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, wherever you listen to this podcast. It really helps other people find our show.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye.
Bye.